Well, good morning, everybody. And as we start off this Wednesday forecast, I just want to focus on the latest information we've got from Hurricane Ian. We're going to begin with some radar imagery here. So as we watch this animation, I want you to pay attention to how we start off with actually two eye walls in Hurricane Ian. And last night we watched on satellite with the infrared and here on radar that the hurricane went through something called an eye wall replacement. That's where the inner eye wall begins to collapse and an outer eye wall contracts in around it. Overall, it is a strengthening process for the hurricane, but as I kind of play this out into the very early morning hours this morning, you can now see the brand new single eye wall that has now contracted inward, and this has allowed the hurricane to intensify. So as we play this forward, getting us right up to about 5 a.m. this morning, you can see the current position of the hurricane. Now, quite a few things have, of course, changed since yesterday, and the biggest thing that has changed is where this hurricane is now most likely going to make landfall in Florida. It's very important given the position of some of the major metropolitan areas here along the Florida coast, and this also changes the trajectory of the heaviest rains as this moves towards the southeast. So the hurricane hunter yesterday made a very interesting pass right through the eye of this hurricane, two passes. I just want to show you the data because I hope you find this fascinating. So we're going to click down here on this graphic from tropicaltidbits.com. And what we're going to be looking at here in red is the mean sea level pressure, which bottomed out around 940 millibars, somewhere close to that. But you can also see the flight level winds. The left-hand side of the hurricane significantly weaker than the right-hand in both of these eye wall penetrations. But the most important information we get out of these reconnaissance missions is just new ideas about, coming from the models, about where the hurricane's going to go. And then this morning, their 5 a.m. update Eastern time from the National Hurricane Center, you can now see the latest track information is going to pull this right here across central Florida, making landfall as a major hurricane south of Tampa. And that's what's really important about the newest updates here. As you remember, throughout this week, I've been mostly concerned about a landfall north of Tampa, but we needed to wait and see how Ian emerged from Cuba and also check out those steering winds last night. And the latest evidence is this is going to come in right here, about 100 miles south of Tampa. It will really quickly dissipate, as normally hurricanes do when they get on land here. So we expect it to traverse the central part of Florida probably as a very weak Category 1, maybe even back down to tropical storm status. But don't focus on that. Focus more on the fact that this is going to have multiple hazards. What's most important for me initially with the storm surge side of this is what the winds are going to look like later on this morning as it approaches Florida's coast, excuse me. So you'll notice now that the winds coming across Tampa Bay would actually be pulling water out of the bay rather than pushing it in. Now there will still be storm surge in this area, but remember our greatest concern was that if the hurricane went to the north of it and this right-hand side pushed into that the bay, we could have seen over a foot of storm surge. But now the latest information is, given the track coming in much farther to the south, that the greatest storm surge threat, is now farther to the south. So the most likely hit here will be somewhere in this vicinity. So where we expect it to make landfall. So instead of having 8 to 12 feet of storm surge in Tampa Bay, the number's been almost halved, as you can see here. But as this moves across Florida, again, there's going to be multiple threats in addition to storm surge along the coast. The Storm Prediction Center has issued an enhanced risk, and most of this is going to be for embedded tornadoes that often happen in the front right quadrant of these hurricanes. So this is one of the risks we're seeing. And the other, of course, is going to be the flooding rains. So already, just looking back over the last 3 days, we can see the heavy rainfall that has accompanied Ian. You can also see the scattered storms on the front that came down and pushed against Ian, changing its trajectory. And you can see the wet weather we've seen around that upper level trough. But if you come into just focusing on Florida, last 72 hours, there are already places here down in southern Florida that have picked up in excess of 6 to 8 inches of rainfall, some places more than that. Along the Keys, very, very wet conditions. So we're going to see where this goes across Florida here in just a second. So I want to show you that by looking at the newest data from the European model. And so this is painting a bit of a different picture than what we saw yesterday, specifically if you were in parts of Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Now overall, the heaviest rainfall threat is going to still stay right there along the main path, but we've seen increases not only right here at landfall, but also over here just south of Jacksonville. Some places now, latest forecast data, possibly picking up a foot of rain. But because of that new trajectory, all right, we're now seeing less rainfall farther to the west than previously predicted. And so that's why parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, and of course the Panhandle here, is looking considerably drier than it had. But this has also increased the total rainfall amounts throughout parts of, this section of Georgia, but the Carolinas, Virginia, and getting over here into West Virginia along the Appalachian Mountains. This is now the region we're expecting the 2 to 5 inch rainfall event. What's important about that is two things. We got some pretty dry soil in this area. So looking at the latest 16-inch soil moisture, it's been quite dry here as of late, and we're going to continue to see the risk of flooding rains on top of very dry soil. Now, outside of this, outside of Hurricane Ian, you know that much of our forecast has been focused on very dry conditions across much of the central United States and, of course, that frost threat. But just to show you how dry it has been, take a look at the last 2 weeks here. This map shows the last 2 weeks percent of normal precipitation, and it's quite clear that there's been a lot of places that have not seen any rainfall in the last couple of weeks, and many throughout the entire month of September have been very dry. That includes a lot of Texas throughout the southeast over to the mid-Atlantic, okay? So what we're going to watch next is just the latest kind of national view from the European model. So let's kind of get this going here. We've seen the hurricane and what it's expected to do. Here's the high pressure by tomorrow morning that's still sitting over, almost sitting right over the top of Chicago. This is the high pressure cell that delivered this frost event we're going to be talking about here in a second this morning. But you're going to notice that Ian's trajectory just continues to pull it into eastern Georgia and South Carolina. That's where the new flood threat exists. And that low we were talking about coming into the Pacific Northwest late this week, it's still here. Why these scattered showers in this area? So as we play this forward, the same stories kind of play out with the interaction between these systems. So here's what's left over of Ian. The high pressure now much farther to the north of it. And the system that came out here through the Pacific Northwest and sits over parts of Wyoming and Montana struggles to really push a lot of its moisture farther to the east. So as we go through early next week, we just don't see widespread heavier rains here getting into the plains out of this system. Let's finish this out for a full week. And this is what we've got out here looking all the way out to next Tuesday night. All right. So if we stitch all that together, this is what the total accumulated precipitation from the European model looks like based on the 0Z run. And so we're adding this all up here. And again, the models are picking up on over a foot of rain right in through this corridor, 2 to 5 inches of rain throughout here, locally heavier amounts against the mountains. But it's also important to take note of large, dry swaths across the country. And another way to illustrate that is just to get the latest update here of the 10-day forecast from the European ensemble on the probability of getting less than a ½ inch of rainfall. So we're going to continue to see wide open harvest windows in a broad sector here of the country as we press here toward the end of September and start the month of October. Now, currently this morning, in fact, let's get an update on this. There we go. This is the 5 a.m. Surface temperature map. With the clear skies, calm winds, we've really seen temperatures begin to bottom out here. Now, if you look at my color bar, I make a pretty hard break right at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see up here where we already have touched frost temperatures. There's a few places throughout parts of Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, but right in here into parts of Illinois, we're already down into the low 30s right there along I-74. So the temperatures here have really quickly dropped, and that's why the National Weather Service has increased the area over which they have put out their frost advisories this morning. Now, this color here represents a freeze warning. And before I go away from this map, just want to point out, as Ian pulls through Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, along the river, and even back over here into parts of Texas, we do have out right now red flag warnings. So this is where we're concerned about wildfire due to stronger winds and very dry conditions. So we're mixing it all in here. We have the cold, we have the hurricane, and we have the risk of fire in between. So just to come back to this discussion on frost, this is a great update from the National Weather Service out of Lincoln, Illinois. They just show you here the Vegetation Impact Program from the Midwest Regional Climate Center. And just to put a point on how early this frost is, normally across parts of Illinois, should there be patchy frost in this area, we typically don't see our first frost until you get out there past the 11th of October. So this would, of course, be about 10 to 15 days early. In southern Wisconsin and Iowa, the first week of October is common, or the very last week of September in some of these areas where this patchy color isn't right in through here. So we can't necessarily say that this is uncommon, but a couple of weeks ago I wouldn't have thought that we would have seen an early frost in these areas given the overall behavior of the jet stream. So this is one of those illustrations where predicting frost events, honestly, more than 4 to 5 days in advance, is just it's a very difficult thing to do. Let's go look at the temperatures though. We'll start off with these low temperatures, and this is this morning. And we're going to play through now to Thursday morning. So again, another frost event here on parts of Wisconsin, lower and upper Michigan. And then as we get into Friday, the cooler air moves into New England. And then as we go into the weekend, there's Saturday's temperatures, overnight lows, Sunday morning lows, Monday and Tuesday. So the temperature pattern is going to shift around a bit. So the heat right now is all up here in Montana. It's going to be hotter in Montana than it will be down here along the Gulf Coast. So as we play from Wednesday into Thursday and Friday, a lot of this is cloud cover driven and heavy rain. Here's the trough that came through, bringing in that unsettled weather late this week here into parts of Wyoming and Montana. There's Saturday temperatures getting into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So we do open back up for some warmth as we watch Ian kind of exit. And overall, the models are still predicting that same kind of pattern that just resists bringing in deep pockets of colder air as we press forward here into the first week of October. So that has at least stayed consistent. I just think it's the depth of the cooler air right now that was misforecast. Okay, that kind of gets us through what the next couple weeks look like here across the United States. I just want to reiterate that throughout South America, we continue to see that stalled out frontal boundary delivering a lot of heavy rainfall from over here in Minas Gerais through Goiás down into parts of Sao Paulo, Paraná, and Mato Grosso do Sul. Near normal rains in Mato Grosso, but I think the really important story right now that's taking shape in South America is down here into this part of Argentina along the Paraná River, and also into Uruguay and really into Rio Grande do Sul. These has been the areas that have been exceptionally dry, and there's continued to be major drought stresses in that area. And lastly, in the report this morning, just take a look at the small piece I wrote about the latest update on the longer range outlook for La Nina. We had some kind of mid-month updates here that suggest that this La Nina continues to strengthen in the near term, but possibly fade once we start the new year. So keep an eye on the National Hurricane Center's website. This is your go-to resource for this, nhc.noaa.gov, and just stay aware of what's going on with Hurricane Ian, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning. Thanks.